they are one of the few wild edible fruits that you can actually forage for in winter.
And they had a lot of different food uses mentioned in the book, everything from raw to minimally processed.
Learn about apples, because if the shit hits the fan, I'm going to go after apples in the wild. We're live, Lindy.
Perfect.
Once again.
Woohoo.
Pumped this time over on YouTube. First time doing it on YouTube. I'm super excited about that. Hopefully it works really well, because we're
fingers crossed
hoping to continue to do this over on YouTube in the future here now. So I'm checking on my phone now and it's looking all right. So I'm going to just leave that over here. Now, today we're going to talk about some wild apple foraging, which I'm super excited about. It's an episode I've been wanting to do for a while now, personally. Mostly because apples are a fruit that a lot of people already know. And I think most people know that, apples are a super common and culturally important crop in the world today. But what a lot of people don't know is that there are many varieties in the wild that you can actually forage for and harvest for free.
For free, everybody.
For free. And what's the most awesome about them, in my opinion, is that they are one of the few wild edible fruits that you can actually forage for in winter, because often the wild apple fruits will remain on the tree during the later months of the year. And in fact, a lot of people actually wait until the frost comes and winter starts to get their crab apples, because they're a lot sweeter at that point in time. And we'll get more into that in a bit. Before we do that, Lindy, very important, we cannot forget that I have a dad joke for you.
I have a dad joke for you too.
Oh, you brought one for me too today.
I did, nice. Yeah. You want to go first?
Well, I'll go first. So, Lindy, what do you call a salty Let me start that over. Words. It's going to be a great live stream today, I can tell already. Wow. What do you call a salty apple?
What?
A crabapple.
Oh, wow. Really good.
Was that one better than last time?
I think that was better than last time.
I think that one was a lot better.
Yeah.
All right. Now your turn. I want to hear what you got for us today.
Let me pull it up here, because I'm one of those joke readers that will forget the punchline as soon as I start the joke. Okay. What's an apple's favorite workout?
What?
Core training.
Hey. Yeah, that's all it's got. That's all it's got. It's got a nice core on the inside.
I couldn't find any good crabby apple jokes, so you got just a generic apple joke. So
well, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, what is the worst part? I mean, I know you love apples, right? So, what's the worst part of an apple addiction, Lindy?
What?
You can't see a doctor about it.
Oh, that's funny.
An apple a day keeps the doctor away. It is known.
Very true. That is known.
It is known.
It is known.
It is known indeed. All right. So, Lindy, I know you want to go over, kind of tell the people what we're going to talk about today here. Just a quick overview for the live stream viewers.
Absolutely. That way you know kind of what you're getting into here. So we're going to talk about some apple history and what we know about the domestication of apples kind of in general. Some different apples you can find in the wild in the US and some in Europe. Some tips on how to identify and harvest apples, where to look for them in your area if they grow there. They don't grow everywhere, but they are in most places. How to process and store them effectively, and some fun ideas to be able to use them in the kitchen. And a lot of these ideas are not the traditional jam ideas. They're a little bit more fun than that. So definitely stay tuned for that part.
Yeah, that was kind of part of our goal, to make this a good resource for you to go to if you want to forage for wild apples in general. So before we get into it, though, I do need to mention one big thing, and that is that it's kind of tough to talk about specific wild apple varieties and species because there's so much genetic variability. So why is there so much genetic variability? Well, the biggest thing is that apple trees have this unique trait called self-incompatibility. That's basically just a fancy way of saying that they can't effectively pollinate themselves to produce fruit. So they need a pollen from a different apple tree to create that apple fruit that we like to eat. And it's also called cross-pollination. And this cross-pollination means that each apple seed grows into a new genetically unique tree. So kind of like humans. So even if you plant a seed or seeds from the same apple, the trees that grow from those seeds can be wildly different in flavor, size, color, even shape. So we have that cross-pollination issue with apples that adds to the genetic variability. But then there's also a lot of wild apple trees out there today that are actually feral trees. So
better watch out.
Yeah, they
They're gonna
are.
get you.
They could be real feral in that sense. I've seen some apples out there with big old like predatory teeth. Not.
It's like the tree in Harry
Imagine,
Potter.
yeah. Imagine the apples start biting. My God. But anyway, these feral trees out there in the wild, they're descendants of cultivated apples that escaped the old orchards or gardens and whatnot. They then adapted to the wild and started to reproduce on their own. And then on top of that, we also have these native crab apples here in the US. And these native trees can then hybridize or even cross-pollinate with the escaped apple varieties and with each other. And when that happens, you get even more combinations of flavors and textures and colors and all that. So there is a lot there. Like there's a lot that can happen in terms of genetic variability. And it kind of leaves us with an endless variety of wild apples to discover, which is also kind of fun, right? Like it's good and bad. And we'll get into why it could be good and bad in a bit here when we talk about apples or wild apples as a food source. But it's just something I want you listening right now to be aware of, because if you go out and forage for them. And despite this huge number of variability, we're going to do our best today to really touch on some specific species, like some of the native crab apples in the US, and then also give you some like just general identification advice to help you, find them on your own foraging adventures.
But definitely do your own research, always.
Yeah, always do your own research. We're going to try to give you some good pointers here, though, now. So before we go into all of that, though, let's talk about some apple history.
Whoa.
I was trying to say that I was hoping to do like a David Attenborough impression there.
Yeah.
The wild apple.
History. the wild apple in its natural orchard.
Yeah. Spreading across the world.
Wow, that's really good.
We need to get an AI to do like the David Attenborough voice for this section.
That'd be so funny.
That'd be so funny. Well, anyway, apple history. So wild apples have been on this planet for a really long time. And I'm just going to share a link here from iNaturalist that I want to read from real quick, just to show you, or just to give you some more info on that. Lindy, can you see my screen?
I can.
It should be streaming through. I think it's streaming through pretty well.
It's streaming. Yep, looks good.
It's streaming. All right, cool. I'm just going to turn that down a bit. There we go. So if we go down on iNaturalist here, they have a lot of info from Wikipedia. I know Wikipedia, not the best source necessarily, but I did verify this on several other websites, and we'll get to that. But they say that, if I can actually find it, I think it's further down. Oh, let me scroll up a bit. Fossil
I like
species.
Wikipedia.
Yeah, it's
a
just
good starting point.
Yeah, starting point is right. So fossil species. And they say that Malus coloardi was found in North America, Idaho. So I had to do a bit more digging there. And I looked into like, is there actually a fossil species from northern Idaho that we have? And turns out we do. Turns out it is one of the oldest fossil species we have. I'm just going to share that website quick too, if it'll let me. Hello, screen. There we go. Here we go. So this is the International Fossil Plant Name Index, and they have Malus coloardi, which is a type of apple, and found in the Eocene Thunder Mountain flora of central Idaho in
Thunder Mountain.
1998.
That's a good
So
name.
I believe this is like 15,000 years old or something like that.
Wow.
I had it somewhere. I don't think I wrote it down, but there was a definite it's definitely a long time period ago when this was growing, and in Idaho, and then also in Russia. So I thought that was just a bit pretty cool, just to show that we do have some fossil evidence of wild plants, because that's we don't often get that in the historic record.
That's so
By the
cool,
way,
though.
yeah.
Can you imagine what it would have tasted like 1,000
Oh,
years
back
ago? What
then.
apples were?
Interesting.
I'm
Yeah.
curious. I would be curious if they all tasted like
Well,
crab apples. If they were,
1,000 years ago, they'd be like how they are now, but like we're
well,
talking 10, 20,000 years ago.
yeah, before the real sweetening and overbreeding of the apples to
Yeah.
get what we have now, like Honey Crisps. I don't think were a thing back then. It would just be
No.
very fun to be able to taste them.
Imagine if Honeycrisps back then were already like a thing. Like,
They'd be the
joke
most sought after.
jokes on me, the person who's against most carbs. Like, they were already eating them 10,000 years ago. And we
Yeah.
find a fossil record of that. So anyway, though, I know, Lindy, you wanted to talk a bit about just
Yeah.
Native American food uses
Mhm.
for native crabapples, because we do
Yeah.
have some info on that.
There is some historical evidence that Native Americans were using crab apples for food. There's a really good book. It's called Native American Ethnobotany, and it
Yep, I got it
mentions,
here.
yeah, that one mentions
It's
quite a good
this
bit of information on that.
freaking monster book, and I think I have it in my book list on the website,
Yep.
theyearofplenty.com. On the blog, I have a book list for all my
Mhm.
foraging books.
It's a really good read. It's not too dense and too boring, which
Mm,
some history books can be, but or history food books, I guess. But
well,
if you're
it's
interested in the topics,
this one is kind of dry, I think, personally. It's like
mm,
it'll just have like one sentence of like, this is how they used it, and then for
yeah.
all the different tribes, we took some notes.
But if you're
Lindy.
interested, it is very, very nice to get into.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the species of crab apples that they do mention in there are Malus angustifolia, Malus coronaria, Malus fusca, Malus ioensis. Let me say that again. Malus ioensis. Yeah, I did that right. Wow. Malus pumilia and Malus sylvestris. So these
Very
were the ones
impressed.
that we could find named in that book, and that book is really good usually at getting it right in terms of what Native
Mhm.
Americans were using.
Yep. And they had a lot of different food uses mentioned in the book, everything from raw to minimally processed. And just some of them, not all of them, some of them will be crabapple fruitcakes. And those were mentioned for several Native American tribes. They are mashed crabapple fruits that are made into small dried cakes. The cakes were then soaked in warm water and then cooked like in a sauce and mixed in with cornbread sometimes. So it's kind of a cool way just to preserve dried little cakes, reconstitute them. Another one was sun or fire dried crabapple fruits. Think of the bags of dried apples that you get at Costco. Uh, you can take those sometimes as a hunting snack or foraging snack when you're going out and about. They also used to store them in baskets until they were pretty soft. We kind of think it was to make them a little bit easier to eat and use in meals. They The fruit was also boiled and stored in cooking water or oil for winter use. sometimes stored in water and topped with mammal or fish grease or oil. Sometimes the fruits were boiled until they were soft and eaten with oil at large feasts. They were also sometimes eaten with fish, which I think that would be a really cool recipe to try is some sort of a like savory crabapple sauce to go over the top of a white fish, which we're going to be ice fishing this winter. So I'm pretty excited about that. Get some
Yeah.
fish, some fresh
Get some
crabapples.
walleye and some
Mm-hmm.
crabapple applesauce. Like, I'm from Wisconsin and they do Friday night fish fry, and applesauce is like a must there. So, like,
Oh,
imagine you get a walleye over the 30 ice over the ice fishing season. Make that with some sourdough rye bread and then some crabapple applesauce. Man, that would be
mm.
a unique Thanksgiving
That
dinner,
sounds good.
right?
Yeah,
Or
that
even
would be a
Christmas
very, I
dinner.
don't know if you'd want it for Thanksgiving, but
Oh,
that's like
everyone
a
always does
turkey day.
turkey. Yeah, I guess. Okay.
Yeah.
Christmas.
Yeah, Christmas maybe.
So yeah,
Definitely.
lots of cool
And
uses
then
by Native Americans. It's cool.
mhm. Some native people of Europe and Asia also use them for food and landscaping as well. So they're a very sought after tree, very beautiful.
All over the world. And what I
Mhm.
thought was really
Yep.
cool is the fire dried crab apples. So I want to do some just like,
Mhm.
put them on sticks and just kind of cook them over the fire. That'd be cool. I, I would probably even be cool
Poldy's
with the
idea of a
normal
marshmallow.
apple. Yeah, that's right. That's so true.
Funny.
Real food marshmallow right there.
There's your next video. You're welcome.
Yeah. So let's take a little closer look at the apple domestication story as part of this history. How did we get the
Mhm.
apple varieties we have today? Well, one fascinating piece of apple domestication of the story is the role of crab apples, actually. And we found a cool article on science.com that sheds some light on this that I just want to read to you quick. I'm going to share it here in the video version of the podcast if you're listening right now. That's great. If you want to see the video at any point, go to our YouTube channel. So here, Science Shot the Secret History of the Domesticated Apple is the name of the article. It's on science.org, not .com, science.org. And they say here that a new study in PLOS genetics shows that modern supermarket apples are more closely related to crab apples than to the other, better tasting ancient species. Apples originated in Kazakhstan, where they show incredible variety in taste and size, then spread along the Silk Road trading route thousands of years ago. The Romans brought sweet apples from Western Asia into Europe. Europeans previously used the fruit for cider, but the domesticated apple's history was murky after that. The new study looked at rapidly evolving DNA regions known as microsatellites in 839 apple samples representing 5 species ranging from Spain to China. And testing these microsatellites allowed scientists to tease out the impact of recent crossings with wild apples. The researchers confirmed that modern apples were first domesticated from wild Asian apples, but they found that subsequent crosses with European crab apples, possibly selected for disease resistance and hardiness or other traits, contributed to the most DNA to modern domesticated apples. The scientists also found no evidence of genetic bottlenecks, which is a severe narrowing of genetic diversity in domesticated apples, a pattern that contrasts with earliest domesticated crops like barley, millet, and wheat. That's probably because of that cross pollination stuff, the genetic
Mhm.
variability there that is hard to deal with. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Super cool.
That crab apples were such a big contributor to the apples we have today in the stores and on the farms and in the farmers markets. But
Mhm.
there's more. While it's, we kind of have some idea of what happened during the domestication of apples, but there's still a lot of mystery surrounding it, I would say. And there's obviously advances in science and technology that kind of keep uncovering new clues. But we also have a few factors that make apple domestication especially unique compared to other crops from the research I was doing. So let me just share another article here, a scientific article. So we're coming prepared with sources, y'all.
Yeah. We bring the science.
So here is from an article from the Molecular Biology and Evolution journal. It's called Phylogenetic Analysis of 47 Chloroplast Genomes Clarifies the Contribution of Wild Species to the Domesticated Apple Maternal Line. I took some notes so I don't have to read all the scientific speech to you all from this article. And yeah, they talk about these few factors that kind of, could potentially be an important part of the apple domestication story. So, a big challenge that early farmers encountered was that apples have what's called a weak domestication syndrome. So, unlike other crops that quickly changed under human cultivation, apples didn't shift quite so dramatically. And one reason is what we just discussed earlier and just a little bit ago, which is that apples don't self pollinate easily, which means that, again, the seeds from a single tree can grow into offspring with a completely different look, different traits, different genetics. So, without reliable control over the tree's traits, early farmers couldn't really just plant seeds to get a particular kind of apple. They had to really be patient and put in a lot of work to see those consistent results. And then at some point throughout the history, there came this breakthrough, which was grafting. So this technique, the grafting technique, basically is where you attach a branch of one tree to another tree, and it allowed people to clone apple trees with desirable traits. It's a common technique in if someone is dealing with a lot of fruit trees, fruit orchards, they do a lot of grafting. And instead of waiting and hoping for the seeds to grow into a good apple tree, the farmers could now take a branch from a tree with apples they liked and graft it onto another tree. And the grafting doesn't change the tree's genetics. So in the new grafted tree, that new grafted tree then produces apples identical to the original. And we don't know exactly when or where this grafting technology or invention was started, but we know that by ancient times, it was already widely used in Europe and was really a game changer for growing apples. I mean, it really was. And then on top of that, some researchers go as far as to even suggest that there's this instant domestication theory for apples. And they think that the spread of grafting itself may have been like the key to apple domestication. So people could simply, again, go into the forest, find an apple tree they like, take a graft from it, a branch, and that way they could then grow the same tree with all the unique qualities somewhere else. And during that time, they were also doing like they were taking root suckers to kind of get that same variety of apples somewhere else. And both those things were really kind of a shortcut that allowed people to bring home wild apple traits into cultivation much faster. And I mean, it makes sense. Think about it. Like if you're trying to cultivate apples and you have to plant a tree, and some fruit trees take like 4 or 5 years to even have a fruit. So, that would, they had to get inventative. Is that the word? They had to get
inventive.
I'm trying to inventive. Thank you.
Yeah.
So
inventive.
It's interesting, but like, this is super cool. I think fascinating stuff. But like, what I'm really curious about is like, how the heck did they figure out grafting? Who just goes? Is like, oh, I'm gonna take a branch from this tree and somehow connect it with the branch of a tree I already have, and then that branch will have fruit that the apple had that I got in the wild. Like, who comes up with that? These people were on a different level. They really were.
Yeah, seriously.
You know what I mean?
Very smart though. Very inventive.
Well, on a different
Definitely
level,
very inventive.
in the sense of like they were so in tune with what, like that's probably all they did was apples. Like
play with apples.
There's a person that was like, you're the apple guy and you're going to figure out how to domesticate this. And that was their life's work. And one of them figured out how to graft. And Linda, you got some info on one of those guys for us, huh? I know you got some notes.
Yeah, he's super legendary. I'm sure most people heard about him when they were in kindergarten, first grade, somewhere in there. His story will probably live on for the rest of history. And this man's name is Johnny Appleseed.
Johnny
I'm going to
Appleseed.
read. Yeah, I'm going to read a little bit from this article we have here. Let me pull it up on my side. And I'm just going to read directly from it. So let me get it here. So Johnny Appleseed, born September 26, 1774, in Leominster, Massachusetts. I hope I didn't butcher that name. Anyone in Massachusetts? I'm so sorry. He died March 18th, 1845, near Fort Wayne, Indiana, was an American missionary nurseryman of the North American frontier who helped prepare the way for the 19th century pioneers by supplying apple tree nursery stock throughout the Midwest. Although the legendary character of Johnny Appleseed is known chiefly through fiction, John Chapman was a genuine and dedicated professional nurseryman who expected to make a profit from the sale of his seedlings. Around 1800, he started collecting apple seeds from cider presses in the Western Peninsula, or Western Pennsylvania, sorry, and soon began his long trek westward, planting a series of apple nurseries from the Alayans to central Ohio and beyond. He sold or gave away thousands of seedlings to pioneers whose acres of productive apple orchards became a living memorial to Chapman's missionary zeal. A variety of distinctive characteristics combined to create the Johnny Appleseed myth of the primitive natural man: his cheerful, generous nature, his affinity for the wilderness, his gentleness with animals, his devotion to the Bible, his knowledge of medicinal herbs, his harmony with the Native Americans, and above all, his eccentric appearance. He had flowing hair under an inverted mesh pan, bare feet, ragged trousers, and an old coffee sack over his shoulders with arms cut out for land, or with holes cut out for arms. John Chapman was the owner of 1,200 acres of planted land, and he died from exposure in 1845. But the legend of Johnny Appleseed lives on in numerous literary works. So
This is from
super fascinating guy.
Right, and this is from Britannica.com, this article that Lindy just read.
Mm-hmm.
Just to give some credit there. Wow, what a dude.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that we have someone that went through all of this work to, start a small business. And his legend is going to live on for the rest of all time.
Yeah.
He's a historic figure at this point.
It's I'm going to go and go into this wild land that was the US back then and still is. And I'm going to just plant apple trees everywhere.
Yeah.
Like
I'm going to
that takes
breed
some
apples.
dedication. He's like, I'm going to make sure there's food for everyone here. Man, do you think he probably ate apples for every meal of his day? Breakfast apples, lunch apples, second breakfast apples, second lunch apples, dinner apples.
Yeah. You go to his house and it's nothing but apples.
Probably. I was gonna tell you, I forgot. I was gonna have you read that in like a British accent, but
oh shoot,
that would have been so much more fun.
I don't know if I could have kept it together. I would have just been very offensive to all the British people.
Yeah, I know your British accent's pretty good. Lindy's thinking about doing a part of like on our YouTube channel. We're gonna do like traditional recipes, and I think Lindy's gonna do them all in a British accent. Yeah.
This is
she doesn't know it yet. She doesn't know it yet.
Yeah. But I got to start practicing.
Yeah. Anyway, so some good stuff on apple history here. I always like to just bring into history because a part of our mission here at the Year of Plenty is to bring you guys closer to your food source, and learning about your food, learning the history is one way to do that. It takes you one step closer to your food. But now that we have taken a closer look at the history, it is time to get into the wild apple varieties, talk about a little bit of species identification and where they grow here in the US and even in Europe. So let's chat about that. Where would you as a forager or what would you encounter here in the US? Now, all apples fall under the genus Malus. Malus, Malus. I don't know how to say it exactly, but when you're reading that scientific name, the first word will be Malus. I'm just going to go with Malus. They are a group of 32 species of deciduous perennial trees and shrubs, and they're in the rose family. Surprising to some, maybe, but actually, there's a lot of wild edible fruits here in the U.S. that are in the rose family. It's a really large a really large family of fruits and plants that bring us some delicious wild edible food. So I want to focus on crab apples first here, because to me, they are like the true wild apple. So there are several crabapple species native to the US, and then there's also some non-native ones from Eurasia, Europe, and Asia. Let's get into the native species first here in North America. And in my research, I looked at a bunch of different primary sources and books, but the one I want to go to is from Sam Thayer. So Sam Thayer, he's one of the top foraging experts in the world, I would say, and he mentioned some general ID factors for native crabapples in his book, Field Guide to Wild Edible Plants. And he talked about 3 native crabapple varieties that are native to the eastern half of the US, which that's where most of the native ones are. And these are the 3 are prairie crabapple, which is the Malus ionensis, the sweet crabapple Malus coronaria, and actually Sam notes specifically that the name here is misleading, sweet crabapple. We'll talk about more of that in a bit. And then the third one is southern crabapple, which is the Malus angustifolia. And if you remember, when Lindy was talking, or when I was talking about Native American of food sources of apples and all that, these 3 were mentioned in the book, in that Native American book. So I'm just going to pull up, I'm going to try to pull up a picture of each with the iNaturalist website, which if you're a forager and you haven't used iNaturalist, you really have to. It's super helpful. Now, again, I do want to note that there's all this genetic variability, and we're going to give you some general ID tips, but it's still really confusing to get it right. And even on iNaturalist, you'll see pictures that look very different, because I think a lot of people also just have a hard time really identifying these correctly, but I'm going to try to do my best here to show you some good stuff. So let me share here the southern crabapple first. So in general, Sam in his book mentions some ID factors kind of for all 3 of these. And I gotta see which okay, I'm sharing that window. I got 3 windows open here on my browser, so I gotta make sure I'm showing the right thing. But the fruits are generally, and we're talking about the native ones here now, the fruits are generally 1 to 2 inches wide, and they're usually wider than long, which I think checks out. Like if you think about an apple, it's more of a like plump, looks, it's not long, it's very wide. And then the native crabapple fruits tend to have green to yellow colors and black speckles. And that's for the 3 native ones that we talked about here. And let me just share, did this switch to the next window here? No. I'm just going to share everything here quick. 1 sec. Let me switch to the other one that has the good pictures, because there's one that has really good pictures of the green and yellow. Okay, that is under the sweet crabapple. Here we go. Let me share that. Sweet crabapple. There we go. All right, you see that, Lindy? So you can really see here's some good pictures of the green ones with the black speckles, right? There's also some yellow here. And they look good. They look good to me. But then they, the native ones are usually green and yellow, but with all that genetic variability and hybrids and all that out there, you could also find crab apples that are red, orange, pink. I had someone on Instagram or X tell me that they had a crab apple that had white apples. Also kind of interesting. I didn't hear about that really or see that in my research, but they said they had one. So usually for these 3 native ones, the apples will grow in small clusters or single by themselves. And they tend to have a sticky surface and smell very aromatic. And a good thing to do for identification is if you think you have an apple, because sometimes they don't always look quite like the apples we see in the store, like these pictures do. But if we switch to another one, let me see if I have another one here. I mean, I'll have some more of my own pictures that I'll share later. But sometimes you can't really see it super well. And so a good thing to do is just take one of those fruits and cut it in half from side to side, not top to bottom. And if it shows a star formation of the seeds, that's an apple. Like that's at least the Malus, in the genus Malus. And I personally think that the fruit is really the easiest way to identify crab apples. So if you're new to them, I would really look for them when you think apples are already on the tree and they're actually fruiting, right? That's when I would do it. So let's talk about the trees. So Sam mentions that for these 3 native species here, the trees are up to 30 feet, 9 meters tall, usually 16 inches in diameter. That's 40 centimeters for our European folks. And they have broad spreading crowns and a single trunk. So I do have a picture too of a crab apple here that I took that I think we could show here now that would make this a bit easier or would be nice to see. Here it is. Let me pull that up. So here we go. So here's a crab apple. This one is in our neighborhood and it's pretty wide, but it's not a huge tree. It's smaller than, this one is, I would say, about the size to like a domesticated apple tree sometimes, but domesticated apples can get even larger. Yeah. Now moving on, the bark of these native crab apples tends to be reddish brown to gray and has small peeling scaly plates. And I have another good picture of that I'm going to pull up here. And I think that's something definitely to look for. The actual bark is always a good identification factor. So here you can kind of see a picture of that peeling bark. But even then there's a lot of variability. Like I have one of the tree I just showed you in our neighborhood. I took a picture of the bark there, and that looks kind of different too. That's what that looks like. But you still have kind of that peeling going on, and some of that those like fissures and scales. You can kind of see the red, gray, brown. Yeah. Then if we move on to twigs, I think I have some pictures of those too. Here, let's see, here's a picture we can look at. So the pigs are usually like gray to red, brown again, and they tend to have rough thorns, at least for the native ones. The native ones tend to have rough thorns on them, and then also those twigs will have the buds and spurs. So I'm going to show a different picture for that, because what I was just showing you there, I think is a non-native crabapple, but we can debate that, of course. So here I got a picture of the thorns that you'd want to look for. On iNaturalist, this is the picture from Josh M. Got to make sure I give credit here. You can see those thorns on there. And that's only for the native ones in the US. Then for leaves.
Very similar to roses.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of. Makes sense. Rose family, right? It is a protection mechanism, I guess. Those thorns. So talking about leaves, I think I'm still sharing here the screen. Yeah. So leaves can really vary greatly too. They're alternate on the branches, so that's good. So they're not opposite of each other. They're kind of staggering up the branch. The leaves are usually 1.5 to 3 inches long, and they're lanceolate, like kind of ovate shape. They have margins that are toothed, slightly toothed, meaning, they have that saw pattern on the outside. And then they can sometimes have lobes. So like here in this picture, you can kind of see, so this is a picture from Douglas Goldman, an iNaturalist. It's got those lobes. So for people listening, it's probably either you come and look at the YouTube video here if you don't know what lobed leaves are, or you just look it up. It's an important thing to learn as a forager, but it's kind of hard to describe over just audio.
It's like a earlobe.
Yeah,
so it sticks out proud
actually,
from the leaf.
It is kind
it's
of
the leaf ears. Yep.
Yeah, I like that. So that could be a thing, but it's not always a thing. And then usually the petiole, which is the little stem below the leaf, is usually about 40 to 70% of in length. Like the length is usually 40 to 70% of the actual leaf. So that's another thing to look for. Now I know we're getting really nitty gritty here, and if you're listening on the audio, don't check out yet, because this is just important. I want you to know, how to identify this stuff correctly. You got to know if you want to forage for these. Now for flowers, they appear in spring. It's actually, if you're a good time to go look for new crabapple trees, is just look for white blooming trees in the spring, because they're kind of one of the first ones to bloom out there, along with some other delicious wild edible fruits out there. But the flowers tend to be 1 to 1.5, 1.7 inches wide. And what's important is that they have 5 blunted tips. Let's look at this picture here from Michael Staton, an iNaturalist. 5 blunted tips, 5 blunted, what are you called? Petals that have blunted tips.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they're usually white to whitish pink is kind of what you're getting there for the flower. Very similar to the cultivated apples, and they're also very fragrant. And in the middle of the leaves, you'll see the anthers and all that. I'm still learning about
the
some
anthers.
of those still learning about some of those botanical terms here. But just so you have an idea of what the flowers are, very showy. They look great. I think they look really cool.
They're beautiful, great ornamental plants.
Yeah, and we'll get into that in a sec here. So those are just kind of some ID factors for those 3 native ones you find more in the eastern half of the United States. There is also a native one on the western half of the United States that I found, which is Malus fusca, the native Oregon crabapple, and it's native to the Pacific coast from California to Alaska. Just going to pull up a picture of those real quick. These tend to be a little bit more red in color too, compared to some of the other ones. And in this one I saw very varying pictures as well, like all different stuff. So here we have landscapeplants.oregonstate.edu is the website, and they have some pictures. So it's an EDU site, so I hope they got the right pictures here for us. But they look a lot smaller and more red, almost tiny. But then on another website, you can kind of see the leaves too. They're very similar lengths a lot, kind of what we looked at for the other 3 native ones that are in the eastern half of the US. But if I just switch to the other website here that I also found for them, this is nativeplantspnw.com. They look a bit bigger on their picture than the previous picture. So a lot of crabapples though that you'll see are tiny like this. Like they're not that big, which is fine though, because there's good ways to use them in the kitchen regardless, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So that's another one for you to study up on, native Oregon crabapple. And then we also have these Eurasian crabapples all around the US. So these are introduced crabapples here in the US, and there are many different species and hybrids in this group, and the fruits usually come in clusters, sometimes up to 20 tiny apples. And they tend to be smaller than the native crabapples in the US. They tend to be from 0.2 inches to 1.5 inches in size. And they're also really cool. I think this is most of what I see out here in Montana, at least, I think are Eurasian varieties. And I see we got,
Mm.
Lindy, we got some people in the chat. Heck yeah.
Oh,
That's what we like to
wow.
see more.
Nice. Heck yeah. Thanks, guys.
Butch says, crab apples for everyone. What great source of nutrients. I agree. Super great source of nutrients. So going back to the Eurasian crab apples, though, they don't have thorns from what I was reading, like the native ones to the US. So that's maybe one way you can kind of distinguish them from the native ones. Another one you will see here in the US, or specific species of European crabapple, is Malus sylvestris. And that is the one that is native to Europe, including Britain, Western Russia, and even Turkey. Cool looking apple. Let me just show a picture here of that one quick. Why not? Let me pull it up here. So also kind
Beautiful
of
flower.
similar. Yeah, beautiful flowers again. Similar to those native ones that grow in the US and the eastern half of the US, I would say. You know, cool looking apples. And that one is also, I think this is the one when we talked about history earlier, this is the one that contributed a lot of genetics to our apples today that we have in the store. So that's kind of cool to know. And then within this Eurasian crabapple group are also all these flowering crabapples. Like in Asia, they are all about crabapples as a landscaping plant. Like they don't really raise them for their fruit often. It's just like they created apples out there, cultivated apples that are super showy, really nice ornamentals, beautiful flowers. Like in the spring, you'll have the entire tree be like a giant flower because, there's so many flowers in
I
each
love it.
branch. And they are usually really tiny apples, fruits on there. But some are really good edibles, and they can look very different from those native varieties that we have here in the U.S. And I've seen a bunch of different crab apples out here in Montana. I'm not 100% sure to what species or variety they are. Regardless, I have some photos for you that I want to share. And I haven't noticed any thorns in these, so I think these are more like the Eurasian ornamental types. One I could identify with the Plant ID app was the pear leaf crabapple, Malus prunifolia, and that's an Asian variety. That's, I think, the one I've seen the most so far out here. I'm going to just pull up a picture that I have of them. This one is super cool looking, and this tree I found was just super packed with apples. Look at that. And this one was so delicious. Like this was a really delicious crab apple that I used and was just even eating
Beautiful
raw.
fruits.
Yeah, super beautiful fruits. So yeah, they're tasty.
They're great for wildlife.
Yep, great for wildlife, great for humans. I want to talk a bit about just the distribution of the native ones. I think a lot of people listening are probably like interested in those native ones. So the native crab apples are really drought tolerant and cold hardy plants, which is why you tend to find these in colder climates, which is cool. One of the few fruits that grow in colder climates. And that also makes them, in my opinion, a really good homesteading plant because they are so hardy. And like you said, they're great food for animals. So if you're a hunter hunting whitetails and you have a big property, like if you're not planting crabapple trees, you're missing out.
Yeah.
So let's look at the distribution of the first native one I want to talk about again and bring up again. That is the prairie crabapple, Malus ianensis. Malus ianensis, let me pull it up quick on the USDA website here. I'm just going to close some of my tabs so I don't get confused. Here we go. So this one, Linda, you can see the map here.
Yep.
This one is kind of really grows in, I would say, the central to eastern half of the U.S. A lot of them around the Great Lake regions. So that was the prairie crabapple. Then we also have the distribution for the sweet crabapple. Pull that up quick.
With
Another,
its misleading name.
yeah, with its misleading name. That's right. That's Malus coronaria. Also more focused around the eastern half of the U.S. Looks like, I think, that's Wyoming right under us, right? Yeah,
Wyoming.
Wyoming.
Yeah.
Looks like Wyoming's got some. So
Funny.
they don't show any in
Look
Montana.
at them go.
Right. And then we have the southern crabapple. Let's pull that one up quick on the map for people to see. The southern crabapple is Malus angustifolia, and that one is more also focused in the eastern half of the U.S., but reaches more into the southern states, Texas, Florida. And then the final one is the Oregon crabapple that we just talked about quickly. Pull that one up quick. And that is one that might be more interesting to the folks in the western half of the U.S. and even up toward Canada. And yeah, so that one is really along the Pacific coast here of the U.S. is where you'll find that one. Hey, Mike. Mike's waving in the chat. Good to see you, man. All right, moving on, though. Let's talk quickly about how these crab apples are different from domesticated apples, the feral ones that escaped into the wild, that have naturalized. So the scientific name for those is Malus domestica. And the most obvious difference between these and the crab apples is that the fruits are usually a lot larger. Think of think of apples you find at the store and at farmers market and whatnot. And Sam Thayer in his field guide, he mentions a few more ID factors for these. So I took some notes on that as well. So he says that trees are up to 50 feet, 15 meters tall, and about 2 feet in diameter. They also have a single trunk. They're wildly branching and spreading in full sun. The bark is smooth when young, flaky, and peeling in short strips as they age. The twigs are finely hairy when young, and also so are the terminal buds. Those are hairy. This one does not have the thorns that the native crab apples do, so that's a big ID factor to look for. And then the leaves are alternate, roughly ovate. The base is broad and they're tipped at the point. There's a nice tip on there. They're a little hairy on top and a little hairy on the bottom. And the depressed veins and the margins, again, the margins are the outline of the leaf. Those are irregular and finely toothed, wavy, and sometimes also lobed. Flowers grow in small umbels, so in small clusters, directly from the twigs, and each of those flowers on a pedicle less than an inch long. So flower color is white to pink, similar to those crab apples again, and about an inch across, and they have those 5 broad petals. So most of the people listening, I would hope, have seen an apple before, like a flower.
I am surprised that the trees are actually so tall for the store-bought varieties. You would think that they would try to breed a shorter tree to make it easier to harvest.
Yeah.
I know a lot of arborists try to trim them so that they kind of grow out versus up.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's very interesting.
Well, it would make it easier to harvest too if they're more broad instead of growing up, Yeah.
But maybe it keeps them away from wildlife a little bit more. I guess that would make sense too. So
Gerald in the chat asks, what's our favorite way to use crab apples? We'll get into that in just a sec. You're almost done with the ID stuff. But I think it's important to talk. Just real quick in summary, how are these, like the domesticated apples that have escaped into the wild, different from the crab apples? Just some general points. So the trees can get a lot larger than crab apples. The fruits tend to be larger than crab apples, and they don't have the thorns that crab apples can have. And the twigs and the terminal buds and leaves are usually hairy, which some crab apples might have. I've seen it on some, but not always.
I have a question for you, Poldy.
Yeah. What you
are
got?
there any lookalikes that you might be able to confuse apples with?
Yes, there are. Good news is I'm not aware of any that are dangerous or poisonous. All the lookalikes that I'm aware of are all edible. But of course, you always want to make 100% sure that before you eat anything from the wild that you know what you got. But one that you might encounter out there, one lookalike, is the hawthorn, also an edible
Mhm.
wild plant, also grows all over the US and Europe, a culturally significant plant throughout its history for humans. I got a picture of that. Let me pull it up. At least one of the native species here in Montana.
Mhm.
Um, and that is, it's
They're
more of a,
fun to harvest from.
yeah. The hawthorn that we have here is, they have dark blue black berries. Is that picture pulling up, Lindy? Yeah,
Yep.
it's coming
Yep.
through. So this is obviously late in the season. They're already shriveled up, but you can kind of tell. I mean, they're pretty tiny. The fruits on them look more like a service berry, in my opinion. They're one of the. If you watched our
Yep.
service berry identification video on the YouTube channel, we talk about hawthorn there too. So the hawthorn, they grow in hedgerows around fields, similar to the crabapples, and they are also in the rose family. But many people, will use them as ornamentals, similar to crabapples. So you'll also find them in urban environments. So it's a good thing to learn these. But like I said, they're also edible. And one big difference, I think, is that wild apples tend to be very tart and sweet in flavor, whereas hawthorns are, they have very little flavor, but they can be a little sweet
Mhm.
sometimes. There's also a red variety. I don't think it might be native to US. I know it's definitely found in Europe. I think they call it firethorn or something like that. Yeah,
Whoa.
so definitely another one to look at. And they also have these big thorns that crab apples can have. I got a picture of that actually. Nasty thorns. You do not want to get these into your eye when you're foraging. I almost got
Oh my god.
my eye poked out by one of
Yeah,
those
probably
ones.
just about.
Yeah, dangerous. Um, yeah, so definitely also look for these thorns in them, because they will have them as well. But
Mhm.
as far as I know, the crabapple thorns usually appear on older wood, and um, as you can tell in this hawthorn, seems like and maybe a piece of older, like an older branch, but seems still kind of young.
Mhm.
So the hawthorn is one look-alike. The other one is wild plums. So good news here, wild plums also edible. One of the greatest wild edible fruits that can be
Mhm.
found here in the US, in my opinion. I found them a good amount in Wisconsin. I found one tree here now in Montana, but it was on private land, kind of hanging over toward the road. I was very
Yep.
tempted to ring the doorbell. Next year I'm gonna stop by, see if they actually harvest their wild plums. I got a picture of that too. Let me pull that up for those of you that don't know what wild plums look like. Here we got an awesome picture I took after a
Mm.
nice rain. These are nice pink. They can be kind of yellowy too.
Mhm.
But the big thing here is that apples will have little tiny seeds, and the plum has one big pit in the middle, just
Mhm.
like the plums you buy at the store. And the flesh is also a lot more translucent, I would say.
Mhm.
Um, so that's something to look for. And again, also edible. But the trees without fruits can look super similar. Like, especially if you're scouting for wild apples in the spring where they just have their white flowers, it's very easy to misidentify them with the wild plum. Um,
Mhm.
yeah. So that's the two lookalikes that I'm aware of. If any of you know of more, if you're in the chat right now, or if you're watching this later on the YouTube channel, the recording, or wherever you're watching or listening to it, drop a comment. Let us know if you know of any other ones, because I want everyone to learn here. And
Mhm.
yeah, share your knowledge with us as well.
Yes, please. It's
Yeah,
always helpful.
it is.
And then moving into kind of when to harvest wild apples or crab apples, they typically appear on a tree in the summer and they ripen sometime in the fall. To check if a crab apple is ripe, you want to cut a few of them open and look at the seeds.
Yep.
Ripe crab apples are usually going to have dark brown seeds, while seeds like a beige, green, or white means that they're not quite ready yet. One thing to keep in mind is some varieties will have lighter seeds, so use this as kind of a general guide. But usually, if you see some apples falling off of the tree, it's a good indicator that they're ripe or getting very close to being ripe. Like we mentioned earlier in the video, best time is going to be winter once they've sweetened up to actually harvest them. You can also harvest them earlier and then stick them in your freezer to make them a little bit sweeter. Um, and not all crab apples are going to produce fruits reliably. Some trees take a little bit of time off. They go on European vacations. They get more than the 2-week vacations that we get here in the US.
Yeah.
So it might produce some years and some years it won't. So that's just
Bummer.
one thing to keep in mind.
It's a thing with
Yeah,
all
I
fruit
know.
trees, though. Yeah.
Yep.
So next up, let's talk about where would you actually find these apples. We showed you the distribution on the map, talked a bit about where in the US you can find them and even Europe. But where do you actually look in your environment, in your habitat around you? So a lot of you who are really about foraging in wild places might not like this answer, but they usually grow they usually grow in urban environments. Our neighborhood here is full of them. Lots
Yep.
of people grow them on as landscaping plants in their backyards. They don't know what kind of treasure they have. They just grow them because
Yeah.
they look beautiful in the spring, and they
Mhm.
don't use the fruits. So I was actually 2 weeks ago, or yeah, 2 weeks ago now, I think. I was walking around our neighborhood right before our big hunting trip, and I was just scouting out homes that have these wild apples on there, and I rang 3 doorbells. No one opened. They're probably peeking through the
Who
blinds,
is this
who
guy?
is this weirdo? Um, so I went with the more controversial way of doing things, and I kind of moved around the neighborhood looking for crab apples that had big branches hanging over fences, and I picked a bunch that were hanging over the
Thievery.
sidewalk,
My
which
goodness.
I tried. Hey, I tried to go ask people first, method first, but yeah, I
Yeah.
was
I
able
mean,
to fill a whole paper bag of crab apples in half an hour in our
yeah.
neighborhood. Now, of course, ideally you go and ask your neighbor, ring the
Yeah.
doorbell. You might get some weird looks, but just tell them what you're up to, what you'd like to do, ask for permission, and then tell them, hey, in exchange for you letting me harvest all these apples, I'll rake all the apples and leaves that already fell down around your tree.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they're gonna be calling you again next year, hey,
Yep.
come again, please.
Yep,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. Some of the other places that you can find them are going to be on forest edges and in hedgerows, young forest and thickets, old fields, especially around abandoned homesteads. Again, it's an ornamental plant. They're
yeah,
beautiful. People love growing them. Yeah. And then sometimes along rivers and stream valleys as well.
yeah. That's a good place to look. And I did in Wisconsin. I found I think it was an abandoned orchard in the middle of the woods on some public land while hunting for white-tailed deer. And if you're a hunter, you can guess that that was a pretty good spot.
I wonder if that's someone's wild tended garden. They're just
Yeah,
letting the apples go rampant or
yeah.
they forgot about it.
I think it was just an orchard that was not found. So Mike in the chat just said
Yeah.
that my audio is a bit quiet. I just turned it up a bit, so hopefully it's
Mm.
coming. Give me a thumbs up or something if it's a bit louder now. I'll try to talk a bit louder. I'm sometimes soft spoken. But yeah, you can find orchards that are abandoned on public land, and those are the honey
Mhm.
holes. That's also where
Yeah.
you want to be go hunting for white-tailed deer. It's a good
Yeah.
spot. All right,
Seriously.
so now uses in the kitchen. Let's talk about them
Yeah.
as a food source and all that. And we had some questions in the chat about that we'll address.
Mhm. Yeah, so for processing and storage, since they're small, they can be a little bit more difficult to process, a little bit more labor intensive. Most people like to dice them and cook them down for juice. You can do a cider press if you're really into apples, and it makes it really easy to get the juices out. The downside of this is there's a lot of leftover apple pulp, but you could probably find a way to eat that if you wanted to pick out the sticks and seeds and stuff. But the other thing you can do with it is feed it to your chickens if you have a homestead, other animals on your homestead, or you can compost it. So return it back to nature. Um, they can remain hard for quite a few months at room temperature, so it is very easy to store. You can dry them, freeze them, pickle them. When you're going to freeze them, slice them and add some lemon juice to keep them from browning. Otherwise, they come out looking a little bit old. And then freezing them can soften them up a little bit. So if they feel a little soft or a little bit brown, they're still fine. Just something that happens when they get frozen.
Right. So how are they as a food source? That's probably what a lot of people listening right now that aren't familiar with them are interested about. First of all the wild apples are edible and they
Hmm.
can be really good, I think. But finding a tasty one can be kind of tough, especially if you're coming into it thinking about like the flavor of apples you find at the store.
They're not
Or,
a honey crisp.
yeah. I've had some really good ones, but you do
Yeah.
need to sample a bunch of trees, or sample a tree before you start harvesting it.
Hmm.
And the last thing you want to do is like, oh, I found a crab apple, harvest every fruit in the tree, carry home a 60-pound basket of trees. That would be a really good day. And
Yeah.
then find out that they don't taste good. So,
Yeah.
they tend to be pretty tart. That's definitely a
Yeah.
thing. They're sour. Some can be a little bit bitter, have bitter notes on them as well. And Heidi in the chat actually asked, do they taste different when they grow in other regions? And I see that Mike answered her already, which is great. Thanks, Mike. So he said that I'll chime in on that question. Different varieties can taste different. Not sure if region makes a difference. I think region would make a difference because it's like the
Hmm.
terroir. You get that even with the like domesticated crops that farmers raise. The terroir, the environment can definitely impact the flavor. And I think that's especially true for any wild plant. Most
Yep.
wild plants you're going to want to sample in different spots to see
Yep.
which one you like best. It's super true for spruce, for example.
Yeah.
One
We
spruce
we
tree could
had
be candy, the other not so much.
exactly same with rose hips too. If you walk 10 feet up the hill, they're going to be totally different than they were just a little bit away. So try a couple. If you find a spot that's got 10, 15 apple trees in one little area, test all of them and just pick from the one that you like.
Yeah, totally. I just want to show some pictures of some that we found this year here real quick. Just to give a little visual for people watching live right now. I think that's the one. So like I mentioned, I think most of what we have here around us are the Eurasian hybrids and
Hmm.
ornamental ones. Here's some really cool looking red, yellowy ones. You can see right here, this is actually in the picture, this is kind of it's a spur, so a growth spur, I think, or fruiting spur, I think they call it. You'll see that. That's something I forgot to mention during ID factors. Here's a leaf, some pictures of the leaves and the ones in our neighborhoods. You can see here my thumb compared to these apples. Kind of small, but you can
Hmm.
get them in quantity and then they'll taste really good. And then there's some bigger ones, even like these I found in Wisconsin. These were a lot
Yep.
bigger,
Those are like the size of a large cherry, I would say.
even bigger than that. Yeah,
Hmm.
they're like fit nicely into the palm of my hand. Here's some more from the neighborhood here. And generally, though, you have that astringent flavor to work with, but that's okay. I mean, if you get a really sour one, so the sourness in the apples is actually coming from the malic acid. That's an ingredient they use in sour candy and also in winemaking often. And you can work with it, but you can find some crab apples that are super sweet, and I have definitely found a good bunch of them like that. And according to Yule Gibbons, who is another legendary forager, I have one of his books here, Stalking the Wild Asparagus. If you don't have this book yet, I would definitely recommend you getting it. It's just like one of the OG original foraging field guides. And I took a quote out of this book on the crabapple section, and Yule says that the very quality that makes wild apples a poor fruit to eat raw makes them superior as cooking apples. Their firmness and wild sour taste with a hint of bitter makes them cook up into some of the best apple dishes you ever ate. Wild apples can be substituted for the cultivated ones in most recipes that call for apples and will usually improve the final product.
Mhm.
So what I'm getting from here is that he's saying that most of them are pretty tart and a slightly bitter. And he says that they're a poor fruit to eat raw. I kind of disagree with that. At least a lot of the ones I found out here this year, especially, were really tasty and sweet. And granted, I did get them after the frost. So again,
Mhm.
harvesting them after the frost is a good idea, just to sweeten them up a bit. Now, what else did I want to talk about? Yeah, if you do get like a bitter variety or like a really sour one, you can still use it. Make cider, make apple cider vinegar.
Yep.
Great ways to use them that way. And they also have a ton of pectin. That's a big thing with crab apples. A ton of pectin. So that's needed for all sorts of recipes, especially if you're making like a jelly or jam or
Mm.
like gummy bears. They'll shine.
Oh,
We should
yeah.
make
Oh
some
my
wild
gosh.
apple gummy bears. We did it with
Those would be
pineapple
so
fruit.
tasty.
Yeah, if you watched our pineapple weed foraging video, we made some pineapple weed gummy bears, but we had to use gelatin. So next time maybe we use pectin. Like if we use
Mm.
we just mix some crab apples into there. Now,
Love that.
one note on texture, real quick. I forgot where I read it, but I guess the season can influence the texture of the fruit. So in the more dry seasons where there's not a lot of rain, you'll get kind of like a mealy texture. And if there's a lot of rain, they tend to be a lot juicier. Now,
Mm.
I think that can also vary very much between the type of tree that you're looking at. Like this year, I found some where you bite into it and it's nice and juicy, and others that just kind of like, I don't know how to describe that mealy texture. It's like
It's like
just almost a little bit like you got sand on your tongue.
yeah,
Yeah,
a little
kind
bit.
of like that. Yeah. So that's just some info on all that and how they are as a food source. You can also use
Mhm.
the buds and blossoms as tea, which I've yet to do. So that's
That would be
something I'd
nice.
like to try out in the spring. Would be fun.
Mixed
And
with some fireweed.
yeah, yeah. Well, fireweed we got more of that in the
Yeah.
fall, but it would be really good. We made some fireweed tea this year. That was awesome. There's a video on that as well on the channel.
Mhm.
Now,
Yeah.
by the way, great survival food source for those of you
Mhm.
listening, that are preppers and whatnot, or if you just come to foraging because you want to be more resilient. That's a big part of our mission here. It's help you become more resilient through your food. Learn about apples because if the shit hits the fan, I'm gonna go after apples in the wild. You can get a lot of them very easily, and they store super well, and they're a versatile food source. So I think they're a
Mhm.
great, if you're into that stuff, great survival
Definitely.
food to know. And then one note I do have to mention that the even apples from the store, wild apples, all of them contain tiny traces of cyanide in their seeds,
Yep.
and I think in their leaves and stuff as well. So it's a little risk. It's called amygdalin, I think it's called, and you would need to eat like a lot of seeds for it to be dangerous. A note here is that heat and oxygen will denature that cyanide, and so cooking and drying is a great way to get rid of that. And
Mhm.
yeah, but just something to be aware of. I'm
Yep.
personally not eating raw apple seeds in quantity anytime soon.
Mhm. Yeah, you'd have to eat so many apples for that to be a problem, but the seeds
Yeah.
also don't feel that
Well,
great to
I
eat,
have an
so
article here from medicalnews.com. I think, let's see, what did they say? They talk about this in detail. Let me see if I can find it. So they said, I should have been more prepared. It's a long article.
that's all right.
Here you go. A 2018 analysis of previous research states that a person would have to eat around 83 to 500 seeds to develop acute cyanide poisoning. And again, we're talking about raw
Mm.
seeds. You're not cooked or dried. So yeah, cool.
Yeah, you'd have to eat a lot of apples raw
Yeah.
for
Now,
it to start
Lindy,
being a problem.
Gerald asked about our favorite way to use crab apples in the chat. Let's get into
Yeah,
some recipe ideas.
definitely. This is where I'm the most excited.
Yeah.
um, I love cooking and figuring out all sorts of different recipes. And when we were looking up recipes to try to share with you guys, most of what we found was very I don't want to say generic, but generic recipes that were a little bit boring to me. So it was kind of applesauce, jellies, pies, cider, vinegar, the things that are, you know, very prevalent in our kitchens today. And we wanted to share some recipes that are a little bit more outside the box, not crazy, but a little more outside the box. So some of them that we found are crabapple butter. So it's a maple crabapple butter. And I think this would be so good put on top of a grilled steak. Just like a little dabble of that. Some of the sweet
Totally.
sour. I think it'd be super tasty.
I'm super excited.
Another,
We haven't done this yet.
yeah.
Let me just pull up a real quick. Here's a recipe from Forager Chef Allenberger. I've had him on the podcast.
Hmm.
Great resource for us foragers out there. His website, and look at
Yeah.
that. I mean that looks so
Doesn't that look
good.
good? Oh,
Oh
looks
yeah,
delicious. Definitely. With the maple added in there, just a
yeah.
tiny bit of sweet, so good.
It's like a
And
nut
then,
butter, but for apples.
yeah, exactly. And another one that we have tried is crabapple chutney. That
Yeah.
was so good. Poldy made this all by his lonesome, I might add, and it was delicious. He put it on top of some grilled burgers, and that is
Out
definitely
burgers.
something that I want to, yes, definitely something I want to recreate
Yeah. So
again because that was
real
great.
quick, I'll give you the quick recipe rundown on this one because it was so simple. And
Hmm.
before I do that, real quick, Butch in the chat made a really good point about the pectin, that it's a great source of prebiotic fiber to support the gut microbiome. I didn't know
Woo!
that, but I'll have to look more into that. Ooh,
Wow, that's
Mike
great.
also just said glaze a ham with that. I think he's talking about the apple butter.
Oh,
Yes.
can you
Yes.
imagine?
That would be
That
so
would be
good.
really good for Christmas dinner.
That's a sugary thing I can get
Oh,
behind. Maple syrup and
yeah,
apples, natural sugars right there. Yeah.
that would be
So
so good.
apple chutney. This was super simple. All I did was take 2 cups of whole crab apples, the small ones I showed. We thawed them because I had frozen them. And by doing that, they got sweeter even and already a bit soft. So then I put them in a pot with a little water, just covered them barely, and cooked for about 15 minutes until they were super soft. Then I ran them through a food mill to get the applesauce without the skins and seeds and all that. Once you have that applesauce, you put that in a pot with a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, a tablespoon of maple syrup, some cinnamon, and quarter onion, and you just simmer that down. You can add whatever else you think is delicious here, maybe some rosemary or something, because the chutney is more of a,
Mm,
I think it's more of a hearty, sweet thing. And
yeah,
yeah, then I simmered
rosemary
all
would be
that.
good.
Yeah, I simmered all that
Mm,
together for about 30 minutes and kind of reduced it down. And yeah, I guess it's probably pretty similar to the apple butter, but it was delicious on those burgers. Like,
mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, it was
definitely
really good.
something to repeat.
Mhm. And some other ones we have here, I don't know if you wanna pull up the recipes for those 2,
Yeah.
Poldy, but crabapple whiskey,
Yep. Crab
that
apples
sounds
and
pretty
bourbon.
stinking good.
I think
Yeah,
I
that
think they
sounds
actually
really
had to
good.
infuse it. So they say here that this is from backyardforager.com. They say soften the crab apples in advance to break down the cellular structure of the fruit. So you can do that by freezing. You can either freeze the crab apples, so they say it here, or in the microwave. Don't use the microwave. Um,
Yeah, just freeze it.
but they say that this lets the alcohol extract the crab apple flavor more quickly. Combine 3 cups of softened crab apples with 750 milliliters of 100 proof bourbon. And I think, what do they say? They add a bunch of spices. Close the container, shake it around,
Oh,
let it
so
sit for
good.
2 weeks. So let it sit for 2 weeks. And then, yeah, you have a bourbon that's infused with crab apples. How cool is that?
That would be a really good holiday drink too.
Yeah, make that for Christmas
Yeah.
for your family. That would be a great gift,
Mhm.
right?
Yep, that would be so tasty.
What's the other recipe you
Another
want to
one,
talk about?
yeah, we've got crabapple chicken sausages.
Yeah,
That
or
sounds
just,
pretty delicious.
yeah, you get those apple sausage,
Yeah.
like chicken sausages at the store, or, do like
Yeah.
pheasant or some wild game with crab apples in
I
the
know that,
sausage.
Danielle Pruitt's book, she's got a few Wild and Whole is the book. She's got a few different sausage recipes in there as well. I think she has a venison sausage. I'm
Mhm.
sure you could put some crab apples in that sausage as well, and it
Yeah.
would be
And by the
awesome.
way, check out the podcast episode with Danielle Pruitt on the YouTube or on all the audio platforms We get deep into
Mhm.
wild food cooking there. Super fun one.
Yep. She's a great chef. Definitely one to look into. Another one that I would love to try is pickled crab apples
So we
because you
got
use them. Oh, go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead. I was just going to say we have an article here from the
Yep.
outdoorapothecary.com. Make sure I
Yep.
give credit.
You can use them kind of in place of cranberries for Thanksgiving. So if you're not a cranberry person, you could try out pickled crab apples.
Yeah,
Be very,
be
very
fun.
fun.
And it looks like in
Yeah.
this picture, they also have some ornamental Eurasian variety, maybe, or there's Oregon
Mhm.
crab apples. They look small. There's a
Yep.
lot coming from one bundle, one cluster, kind of like cherries.
Yeah,
They
they're
look
like little
good.
grapes.
Autumn spice pickled
Mhm.
crab apples. What a way to use
Yeah.
them. What else we got?
Yep, and they're so fun because you can add different spices. Some
Right.
more are whole canned crab apples.
Yep.
Pulling that one up there. Yep,
And
great way to preserve them.
yeah, actually, so Olena Mushroom Foraging on Instagram, I think her name is. She's from Ukraine and a great forager, and she sent me a bunch of pictures of hers that she does, and she said she'd write up a little recipe for us to share with people at some point. And
Nice.
she
That's
says
awesome.
the red ones do really well for canning and are tasty. At least the red
Mm,
ones that grow in her area. Yeah, so you can can them. That's one way to use
awesome.
them.
Yeah, and then whole, or not whole, but baked caramelized crab apples.
And they
I'm
are
thinking
whole.
like apple pie almost. Look at that. They look
Yeah,
so good.
we got some pictures here in the recipe. It's kind of a crappy picture. But they yeah, they literally take the whole little crab apple. I think they hollow it out a bit and they add some like nuts and stuff in the middle and then just bake that whole
Mhm.
with some it looks like
Also a
vanilla
very fun
extract.
holiday appetizer.
Yeah, this will be a really fun one. Yeah, so
Yeah.
unsalted peanuts, sage leaves, butter, vanilla extract, a little bit of sugar. You could
Mhm.
probably go with, well, you might want a little maple syrup. That's a fun way. I always like the simple
Or
stuff like
honey,
this.
something.
Simple
Yep.
ways to use them are the
Yep.
best, in my opinion.
Yeah, and then you actually get to taste the flavor of the fruit versus just tasting sugar, which is
Exactly.
nice.
Or like, yeah.
Um, You can also do fruit leather. I don't
Yep.
think we
With
need to
the
really explain
pectin,
that one too much.
they're really good
Yep.
mixed with others like serviceberry or chokecherry. You know, they're good
Mhm.
fruit to mix with other fruits for a fruit leather.
You can do air and sun-dried crabapple raisins.
So this is kind
That
of
would
what we
be very
talked about
fun.
during the history section. That's what Native Americans did. And I
Mhm.
found one tree. I'm sharing a picture of it right now, where the uh, the apples were already sun dried on the tree like a raisin. And
Mhm.
actually, I have a book here from Tom Alpel, Foraging the Mountain West. Let me just see if I can find it quick. But he takes these and he puts them in a candy bowl and just serves them like that. He does mention the cyanide and that, you're going to eat the seeds, but I mean, it shouldn't be an issue really if they're air dried and been exposed to oxygen. He just says don't eat too many of them, but it was just kind of cool. I'm trying to find this picture of him showing them in the bowl if I can. Here we go. Yeah, Shandy, let me stop sharing this one real quick. This picture, see that? Yeah, in the candy bowl.
Oh, yeah.
Looks good.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
this
looks
is more of
super
a
good.
traditional way, I guess, or a simple way to use them as almost wild
Mhm.
candy.
Definitely. Another one would be crabapple ice cream, which we do have a whole podcast about making ice cream, so you should
That's right.
definitely check that out.
Nutrient dense ice
Mhm.
cream making.
Be
Super.
super good in there.
You if you are not making your ice cream yet, you're missing out. Like, don't buy that store bought crap
Yeah.
with 50 ingredients.
Yep.
4 ingredients in a good nutrient dense ice cream. We
Yep.
go all into that podcast episode. I think it's on the channel
Mhm.
on YouTube already. I might not have posted yet. It's definitely on the audio episode, like on the audio
Yep.
platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
Mhm. Definitely. And then another one that I found, which was floating around on some Reddit pages, was chili flake crab apples. So it's
Ooh,
salt, pepper, chili flakes. Sounds so interesting.
So you dehydrate them or
Nobody
what?
mentioned if they were cooking them. I would assume you would cook them a little bit, kind of heat them up, put on some chili flakes and salt and pepper,
Huh.
maybe a little bit of olive oil or something. But they were all saying they just kind of cut them in salt, pepper, chili flakes. So
Interesting.
could be a very interesting snack to try. Yeah.
You could probably also like
Yeah.
get the crab apples, dehydrate them, and then grind them up into like little chunks
Mm,
in a blender and mix them with a spice, using kind of a spice like that. That might be
yeah.
interesting. Just thought about that
Be a
now.
good like rub to go on meat,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
like a
Right. Mm,
smoked crab apple pork something. Like, oh,
I like it.
that could be so fun.
That sounds really good.
um, yeah,
Yeah,
and the other
those were
thing is if
yeah,
you don't
what sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
if you don't like eating crab apples or you're not an apple person, but you have a crab apple tree or your neighbor does or something, it's a holiday season, so we need decorations.
Yeah.
They make awesome decorations and they're very easy to do, super fun to do. So if you have kids or crafting circles or whatever the heck you do, just buy some borax and go pick some crab apples. So super easy to make kind of crystallized ornaments. So you take borax, put it in warm water, and dip whatever it is that you want to put ice crystals on and let it cool down. And the borax is going to create like a ice crystal decoration. You can do leaves from the crabapple trees, the crabapples themselves. You can do pine tree branches, pieces of wood, deer antlers, like kind of whatever you want to do in there. But it's a plastic free alternative for Christmas decorations.
It's such a great
And
idea.
they're just so fun. And you don't have to keep them forever and ever. You can
Yeah.
dispose of them.
Especially now around recording this toward the end of November. If you still need some Christmas gift ideas, this is one thing you could
Mhm.
do. I really want to do
Yeah.
this with, I think you can do this with morel mushrooms, where you get the
Yeah.
mushrooms, use like the borax, and then you can make mushroom mounts. I need something like
Super
that in
cool.
my house for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, so fun. One other kind of traditional, non-traditional way to use apples, is if you're going through and you're trimming your apple tree or you have one that fell down or something like that, you can use the bark
Mm,
as a natural dye. So if you have yarn that you wanna dye or clothing or whatever it is, you just need to make basically a very large tincture, but with water. So you just let the bark sit and soak in water for a few days, strain it, keep all of the water, and then dip your clothes in there. You can heat it a little bit. You don't want to like boil your clothes, but heat it, and you get a really nice, pretty dye from the apples. That's
yeah. And
also
then
very
that
fun.
was actually my Native American book, history book too. They talked
Yeah.
about Native Americans using the bark for dye. And
Mhm.
there's also medicinal uses that we might get into another episode for you all.
Yeah.
Cool. So one more
Mhm.
thing I wanted to share real quick is a little bit about the nutrition, because I found a scientific article that talked about that. The article is called Phytochemical Compositions, Health Promoting Properties and Food Applications of Crab Apples, a Review. And in the abstract, they mention that it is shown that crab apples are a good source of polyphenols, terpenoids, vitamins, lipids, fibers, soluble sugars, microelements, organic acids, and amino acids, which exhibit antioxidants, anti-cancer, lipid-lowering, anti-diabetic, and anti-inflammatory activities in vitro and in vivo. So here's a little bit
Mm.
interesting tidbit on nutrition. There's definitely good amounts of nutrition in them, as well as with most wild edible plant species out there.
Mhm.
They mentioned lipids here. I don't know what fats would be in the crab apple. That'd be something to look into a bit more.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is most of what we want to talk about here. To end it, I really want to leave you guys with this quote here from Tom Alpel. He says in his book, Foraging the Mountain West that when you landscape your yard, be sure to keep the neighborhood kids in mind and plant fruit trees along a front sidewalk to cultivate the next generation of foragers. And that is very true.
Yeah.
I think that's a powerful quote. We have to do more to, get more people into foraging and care about the landscape, care about nature, care about the wild food sources out there, care about preserving the skills. That's a big thing of why we're doing this podcast and why we were so passionate about sharing all this information about foraging. It's one of the oldest human skills, but almost no one does it anymore. And it is very rewarding in so many ways.
Yeah.
So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for chiming in live here. This I hope it came through all right on YouTube and we didn't have too many internet issues. Thank you so much for the people who were in the chat, chiming in. That is awesome. We want to see more of that interaction.
Definitely.
That was super fun. And we got a lot more cool episodes planned. One that I want to do next is just talk about some other wild edible plants and mushrooms potentially that you can find around the winter months, since we're going into like the colder season here now. You can still forage for things during the colder season, and it doesn't have to be just the spring and summer. But yeah, and then I got some more guests planned for the Year of Plenty podcast. Those won't be live episodes, but they will be on the YouTube channel and on all the audio platforms. If you guys like this, definitely head over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Listen to all the other 150 episodes we got there. And don't forget to leave a 5-star review on those platforms. That really helps. And then if you're watching on YouTube right now and you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button. Watch some of the other videos we got out there. Super appreciated. And if you got other topics you want us to discuss in the future, you can let us know in the chat, comment on this video when we post a recording, or just chime in on future live streams, because always looking for new topic ideas. And I want to make sure we share stuff that you guys are interested in. All right. We're gonna go hit the gym now. Leg day.
Yeah.
I haven't eaten yet, so I'm hungry. All right. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
See you later.